Hi, I'm Emily of British Girl Bakes, and I'm going to show you how to make this festive red and white striped cake. To start with, I'll show you how to make bright red frosting, and then how to apply the stripes and add details with sprinkles, and then how to make these fun sprinkled spikes on the top and sides. For the red frosting, I use my 4-minute buttercream, and I've put the link for that tutorial and recipe in the top of the screen and in the description below this video. I use Americolor Super Red Gel, which is very concentrated and gives a nice bright colour. Squeeze a generous squirt into your bowl of buttercream, and for these stripes you really only need between half a cup and 1 cup of buttercream, depending on the size of your cake. But I'm making a much bigger batch here because I'll be using it for a few other cakes as well. Mix it together, and if your colour is lighter than this, add some more until you get a shade that's red rather than pink, but not necessarily quite as dark and bright as you'd like it. Then cover it up with a lid or cling film and let it sit for at least 30 minutes to give the colour a chance to develop and darken. If you haven't already, frost your cake and put it in the fridge for at least an hour so that the frosting sets. Choose some sprinkles if you want to decorate your cake with them, and for the stripes I'm going to use this stencil, which is intended for bigger cakes than this 4-inch cake that I'm using for this, but it will work. Here's my red buttercream after 30 minutes, and I'm going to add a bit more colour, and I'm confident this will be enough, so I'm going to use it straight away and it will darken as it sits on the cake. I'm going to use some sellotape to hold my stencil in place, but you can pin it into the cake instead if you prefer. Take your chilled cake out of the fridge and put it on a turntable. A turntable isn't essential, but it makes the whole decorating process much quicker. Wrap the stencil around the cake, pressing the base down onto the cake board so that it's sitting around the very bottom of the cake, and wrap it tightly around the cake, taping it to hold it in place, or pushing a pin through the stencil and into the cake. Press the stencil against the top of the sides of the cake as well, and if it doesn't stay there, you can use a clothes peg or tape or another pin to secure it. You can see that my stencil is bowing around the cake instead of sitting tightly against the sides, and that's fine. As I mentioned before, the stencil is meant for bigger cakes. Now just spread your red buttercream onto the stencil, spreading up and down to cover the stripe gaps from where they start at the bottom all the way up to the top of the stripe or the top of the cake, whichever comes first. It's risky to spread from side to side unless your stencil is pressed completely flat against the side of the cake, because buttercream can get underneath the stencil and smudge the outline of your stripes. You can spread the buttercream relatively thickly at first, and then after applying it, swipe it up and down with your offset spatula to spread it more thinly and evenly around the cake. When you're happy with it, pull out the pins or cut the tape, and carefully peel off the stencil. Don't expect the cake to look perfect yet. Put it back in the fridge for about an hour so that the red buttercream sets and gets hard. And then use a sharp knife to trim off any red buttercream sticking up around the top of the cake. This way, you won't get red stains on the top of your cake. Use a knife or offset spatula to scrape around the base of the cake to take off any red buttercream smudges on the cake board, being careful not to scrape the cake as you go. And then once you've cleaned up the cake board that's closest to the cake, you can use a paper towel to wipe around the outer section of the cake board. Now it's time to tidy up the stripes. Where my stencil overlapped itself, there are sections of the cake without stripes, and even within stripes, there are parts where the buttercream didn't stick to the cake and must have come off with the stencil as I pulled it off. This is a fun opportunity to spice up the design with some sprinkles to add some texture and detail. Where this stripe stops midway up the cake, I'm adding a few large ball sprinkles to continue the line up to the top, and I'm doing the same down here at the bottom of this stripe. You can fill in the middle of lines too, not just the top or the bottom, and it looks like an intentional part of the design. Here, I'm scraping off part of the stripe to add more sprinkles to match the other stripes, which have several sprinkles in a row instead of just 1 or 2. If any stripes have smudged, like this one has here, you can use a sharp knife to gently scrape sideways to remove the smudge. And this works because the base colour of frosting, the white, is cold and hard, and won't get damaged by scraping the red gently off it. I love how asymmetrical the stripes look, with some large open spaces between some of them, because it shows off the smooth frosting underneath and looks like an intentional artistic part of the design. You could fill the gaps with a message written sideways if you wanted to, or you could reapply the stencil and spread buttercream over it again to make more stripes, but just make sure you clean the stencil completely before you do that, so you don't drag any leftover red buttercream back onto the cake. Now I'm going to make some spikes to add more decorations to the cake. To do this, you'll need candy melts and some sprinkles. You can use white chocolate instead, but I don't recommend tinting it red because you'll need a lot of gel, and it will affect the consistency of the chocolate and probably make it seize up. Melt the candy melts at 50% power in the microwave for 1 minute at a time, and then pour them onto parchment paper or wax paper and spread them around with an offset spatula. They need to be thick enough to withstand pressure as you push them into the cake. Scatter your sprinkles on top immediately, before the candy melts set, so that they stick. Now you can either let this set and then cut it, or score it now, let it set, and then cut it, and I'll show you how to do both. If you let it set, or move it to the fridge to chill it so that it sets more quickly, when you cut it with a knife, you'll get random shards of candy melts with uneven edges and unpredictable shapes. This is the quickest way to do it, and if this is the look you're going for, great. If you want a neater look, with tidier shapes, before letting the candy melt set, use a sharp knife to score where you eventually want to cut them, using straight rather than curved lines because those work best. Let the candy melt set at room temperature or in the fridge, and then cut along the lines you scored, and in most cases, the candy melts should break where you intended them to. If you refrigerate your cakes after frosting and decorate them, which I do, it's best to leave your cake out at room temperature while you do this, so that the frosting softens and it's easier to arrange the spikes on it in a minute. To place them, just hold them against the side or top of the cake and push firmly in, holding the cake board on the other side of the cake, so that the cake doesn't slide around when you apply pressure to it. You can place the spikes in a line, or cluster, or pattern, or all over the cake, whatever you like. And there it is! Thank you for watching! If you enjoyed this tutorial, please click the thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel for a new cake decorating tutorial every week.